Hello and welcome to Will's Infinite Library. I'm Will, and this is my Infinite Library. Okay, so the first book that I read in April was Gideon the Ninth, and this was kind of the continuation of my sci-fi journey that I've been on recently to read more sci-fi. And there were some like big books released in recent years that I was just feeling some FOMO for, and I was like, I want to have read that, if that makes sense. So, foreshadowing here, I kind of forced myself to read some of these books and enjoyed things about all of them, but it did feel a bit like work in a way that I didn't want to when thinking like reading more genre fiction would be more fun and entertaining. Anyway, let's get into Gideon the Ninth. So, Gideon as a character is left as a young child in the ninth house. There are 9 planets in this kind of solar system, this world, and she's left as a child on the doorstep essentially of the ninth house. She grows up there. She's kind of one of the only kids there, and as such, she's kind of raised by the ninth house, but also kind of like there's a sense that she's not supposed to be there. So she's not treated the best, like she's taken care of and that kind of thing, but she wants to get out of there. She spends a lot of her youth trying to escape and coming up with tons of different escape plans, always getting caught. And it opens with her in her next escape plan, trying to get out of there. And because of this kind of setup, Gideon comes off as kind of like a real punk kind of character. And I mean that in kind of all senses of the word, like kind of anti establishment, but also like just going against the grain. She's very like outspoken, she's wisecracking, full of all these quips and jokes, and because of that, it makes it fun to read because she's always making jokes. She talks in a very colloquial, modern way. Like she'll make jokes that you'll be like, would they talk like that in this world? Because the other thing is, this is a sci-fi fantasy kind of novel where it feels more like Star Wars than anything, in that it feels like kind of a fantasy in space. So like the setting is sci-fi, but the story is fantasy, and like the whole setup of the houses and that kind of thing feels more fantasy. And the other thing I will say though is there's kind of a dark twist to it, so it feels also kind of like horror in the vibes. And the best thing I can think of is kind of like Army of Darkness or Evil Dead or something like that, like these kind of campy horror cult classics that are like as much people like to laugh at them as much as they like to be scared by them. It has that kind of comedy tone. So it feels kind of swashbuckling and fun. Overall, it has a really great concept, really great setup of space necromancers, which is just kind of like an interesting twist. But I will say it felt very uneven. It is really fun in the action-packed parts, but there are a lot of parts that don't have action and are just kind of like explaining what's happening and how the world's set up and who the characters are, because there's really like 18 main characters, because the book takes place during this kind of like competition to be the next like leader of this civilization. So a necromancer comes from each of the 9 planets, and they each have like a champion, which is called a cavalier. So Gideon is the cavalier for her necromancer Harrow, and the whole thing chronicles their journey of like trying to get Harrow to be the next leader. But because of that, each planet has 2 main characters, so that equals like 18 main characters. They're referred to as different names, by their title, by their planet number, and it gets really confusing. And I did not know who a lot of the main characters were until like later on, because it just kind of throws them all at you at once. I think if they'd introduced like a couple a chapter and then like focus on them so you get to know them, it would work really well. But it's like all kind of thrown at you at once and jumps back and forth between different ones. So I was very disoriented in the characterization, which is maybe what made me lose kind of the immersion. And the other weird thing too is a lot of the main characters die, spoiler alert, because it is kind of like a horror setting, but they're all necromancers, so like death doesn't seem as like high stakes as it normally would, because you think you can just bring people back. So that was kind of weird. Like I said, the best parts that I most enjoyed were the parts between Gideon and her necromancer Harrow, when they were working together, even when they were kind of like razzing each other or annoyed by each other, when they were working together and trying to solve this mystery, that was the most fun for me in this book. But most of them, they were just hating each other, and that was explained later on. It becomes a plot point, like their backstory makes sense, but it's just not fun to read hating someone so much. And yeah, overall, like kind of I said before, I think I felt a lot of FOMO to read this book because I saw it everywhere. It looked cool, it looked fun and exciting, and it had its moments where it was, but I think it just ultimately wasn't for me personally. And this goes back to my journey of trying to read more like entertaining books, like purely entertaining, pure escapist, whatever that means for me. And I think I've been like watching too many booktube channels that talk about fantasy books, and which I enjoy. I love watching the channels and hearing about the books, and I think I want to read them, but in reality I just like the idea. It's not like I need to stop getting swept up in this because it happens to me time and time again, and I enjoy fantasy books from time to time, but it's just not something that I want to read day to day. Like I don't want to be reading even every month. I don't want to be reading fantasy or sci-fi. It's just kind of something that I like to keep on my radar. So yeah, so then I dove into some more contemporary and literary books in the rest of the month, which felt like a breath of fresh air and kind of like coming back to what I really do find entertaining. Because Gideon the Ninth, I was counting pages constantly. I was like, let me get through another page. Let me get through 10 more pages, and I'll get to the end if I keep doing this. The next book I read, though, was Real Life by Brandon Taylor. And this book is contemporary literary, which also can sometimes feel dense and like hard to get through and like you're counting pages. But with this one, I did not. It breezed past, and I was like, how did I read 20 pages in just one blink? But, anyways, this book is broken into long chapters. I think there are 10 of them, following a character named Wallace, who is a gay black scientist I think he's in grad school. He's definitely like an academic researcher. I'm not sure if he was actually in school, but he is an academic researcher. And his colleagues at the university and friends are all part of this like friend group, and there are all these different kind of dynamics between them, and it begins really episodic. Like each of the long chapters will focus on, like, the first one is like Wallace and his friends, a day at the lake. And then the next one is Wallace and his friends. Oh no, the next one is like Wallace in his research, doing his research and his relationships with the other researchers. And there's like one with Wallace playing tennis with a friend, and then like it gets into that friend's relationship and like how Wallace sees it and that kind of thing. And throughout this, it gets pretty weighty. There's a lot of racism and homophobia going on that Wallace has to deal with that feels really annoying and unfair and like really frustrating. And I just wanted to give Wallace a hug so many times because he's so relatable and he's dealing with so much crap that like other people are just kind of projecting onto him, I think, more than anything. And it's just showing like the unfair dynamics in the world. Like, yes, people have to deal with these issues every day. In addition to like being good at his job, he also has to deal with these like office politics and people being like really nasty to him and really trying to push him down. And because of all of this, he's feeling like he doesn't want to be a researcher anymore. And this kind of creates a rift in his friend group as he kind of like figures out what it means to be him and what it means to live a real life, to use the title. There is kind of this idea that he hasn't quite started life or he hasn't gotten to his real life. He's like trying to figure out who he is and what he wants to be in the world where he will thrive. And after those first few large sections that are really episodic, it then begins to kind of open up and everything interweaves more. I don't know if that's just the way I thought of it, but that's how it felt to me. And it becomes more of like a complicated love story, which is interesting because it's like quite a shift. But I really enjoyed this book through and through. Like I said, I found Wallace to be a really lovable character, easy to connect with. He like lets you into his life, which I love those kind of stories when you feel like you're just sitting down and someone's telling you their story directly to you. I really enjoyed that. It's beautifully written. It does get a bit heavy, and it gets quite heavy towards the end, with kind of physical abuse and just this really fraught relationship. So it takes a bit of a dark turn. So I will say, just beware of that if you're thinking about reading this. It's a great book, and that isn't like the focus or anything, but it does come up. So be prepared. The next book is actually a reread, which is The Annual Migration of Clouds. This book, I believe my sister gave it to me for Christmas, like right at the time I started this channel. And I read it like pretty soon after that, but I looked back and I never talked about it on the channel. So I wanted to talk about it because it fits like that kind of vibe that I talked about in recent videos of like being kind of between literary and genre and speculative and that genre line. And so I wanted to talk about it as I was going through books on my shelf to get ready for the book sale. I found it and I was like, oh, I haven't talked about this. So I read over it again so I could refresh myself. So this is kind of a post-apocalyptic story that takes place in a future world in which this kind of fungus has spread through humanity and kind of devastated society. So people live in kind of encampments in a few cities, and the fungus kind of lays dormant in you, but then it like takes over and you basically don't die or become a zombie right away, but it takes over you and like kind of controls you. So you lose yourself over time and you don't really know when it's going to happen, but you know you're infected with it. So pretty heavy stuff. It also references COVID, and it made me think a lot about specifically Station 11 and that kind of thing, and how I read Station 11, and it was personally too soon for me. This book was written after COVID, and it felt right to me. Like it felt like it had the right reality and weight of a post-apocalyptic world after this kind of pandemic that they're still living with. And maybe that's part of it too, is that people are still living with it, because maybe part of with Station 11 what I struggled was there was this terrible pandemic and then it was over and they had to rebuild. But like we're saying now with COVID, like it's never over. It's just you're trying to rebuild while it's still going on. And so maybe that's part of why I connected more with this one, but also it just has that right balance where it feels weighty and meaty, but it doesn't feel like it's just dragging you down. Like it's about kind of like rising up and hope and this community coming together to support the main character Reed, who gets an acceptance to a school in a city, which is like the coolest thing that can happen to you, the best thing that can kind of happen to you in this world. So she's really excited about that and wants to go there, and it's all about kind of her journey to get there and her community's support for her. And for me, I found that a lot more hopeful than the message of Station 11 that was like, society is over, good luck. It was more like, this is the thing that we're hoping for and striving for, and this is what we're still struggling against. So that balance just worked better for me, I think. And the other thing is, it's a really, really short book. It's like under 200 pages, maybe like 150 or something like that, like almost novella length. But it feels like the right length. Like it gets into exactly the right amount of detail where it's always interesting and meaty, but it introduces like just the right amount of characters, that it explores them all but doesn't like leave anything hanging, and it doesn't like shy back and only have one main character. So it felt like a good amount of characters and action and plot, a really nice tight little package. And the thing I noticed too, like reading this right after Real Life, was that both of those books kind of ended on what I think of as like a short story ending. Like they ended like right as the main character was undergoing or like given the tools or experiences to go through a big life transformation. Like it's like the novel was preparing them for this big shift in their life, and then it kind of ends with you thinking, well, how is that going to work? Like we saw this journey, but like what's going to happen next? And it can be a little unsatisfying, to be honest, but like in both of these cases I think it worked, and it's honestly just a different style of ending. I think it's not personally my favorite, but it makes me think, and so I respect it and admire that kind of shape of a story and that type of ending. The next book that I read is called Bleeding Light by Rob Benby, and this is a really interesting story. Again, I'll go back to Emily St. John Mandel. To me, it felt a lot like Sea of Tranquility meets rabbits, if you can imagine that. So like almost like there's all these like weird conspiracies and things, and like weird like paranormal things going on that you're not sure, is it real or not, like what's the truth here, what's being swept under the rug. But also it follows four main characters around the world, like it's very global, and they are each kind of dealing with their mundane day-to-day problems, but also this kind of like supernatural paranormal like view into another world. So it starts off with a character who's a ghostwriter, but they like hire out their ghostwriting, so they're like really distanced from the stories that they are trying to tell. And he travels to an island off the coast of Kenya to interview this like mysterious CEO who's like very suspicious. His company's very suspicious, and he's like MIA. He can't find the guy. He never shows up when he's supposed to, but he's left behind his some recordings. And in the recordings he talks about this experience that he had seeing into this mist that came in off the ocean, and it was like this light, and this is kind of like the bleeding light, and how it was like opening up a door to another world that invited him in. And then the main character gets this kind of sense of like, could he get into that world too? Could he see it? And then it switches to another main character, so there are four in total, and follows her. And she's like an administrator in a school. She's like just out of school herself, very young, dealing with like all the trials and tribulations of early career, young 20 something. But, anyways, her story then kind of focuses more on demonic and things like that, and in that kind of view into this other world. And it gets really dark and heavy, and it's all about like blood sacrifice to get into the other world. And these are all things kind of off the page, like ideas of things that drive their stories. But it's all very like, most of the things that happen are very day to day. It's just like this kind of idea that you could see into this other world. And like, I feel like from that point on it gets really dark, though the previous one was dark too, and there was this sense of like blood as well. And then it shifts again, and then the next one's story becomes more like unstuck in time, almost like it goes back in time, and like time itself becomes kind of murky in a sense, like in a paranormal way, or potentially paranormal way. And then it jumps into the last story, which focuses more on like seeing into another realm through visions, and also like drugs, like acid trips essentially, and like the things that this character sees or experiences while high. But also he's had these experiences before that, like when he was a child and completely sober. So, and the first character also was dealing with like addiction issues, so that is kind of a theme that runs throughout it as well. But anyways, I think I'd say it feels like Sea of Tranquility because it focuses on this kind of like supernatural phenomenon that's seen in different ways, experienced in different ways, but like this longing of characters to kind of get out of the mundane trap of the world and see something beyond it. And it jumps around through different characters and through the world around this one kind of thing, kind of like Sea of Tranquility does. But to me, this felt, even though it's like the stories aren't directly related, though they do overlap, it felt more cohesive to me than Sea of Tranquility, and more fleshed out. Like, it is a longer book, so of course it's going to be more detailed, but it felt like it fleshed out its themes and ideas a bit more than Sea of Tranquility did. So if you liked Sea of Tranquility, but like me, you were kind of like, felt like you were left hanging a bit and wanted to see it explored more, I think this is a pretty cool book that does that. But it is quite a bit darker and like delves kind of into horror almost. So beware of that if that is not your cup of tea. Otherwise, it's pretty interesting. And the other interesting thing, just a side note, is that the author is also a musician, and he produced his own soundtrack for the book. Like, I saw it on the website for the book and thought like he'd made a playlist on Spotify or something, but no, he actually like made the songs. So that's pretty cool, and they're like eerie and otherworldly as well. So cool detail. The next book I want to talk about is Future Fish by Connor Sneed. And oh my gosh, this book, like, It was so good. It's when I saw it on Eric Carl Anderson's channel. He just talked about it in a like book pickup video recently, and I saw the cover and heard like the smallest snippet about it, which sounded interesting, but I don't know why. I was just like, that's gonna be my next favorite book. I have to read it. So I impulse bought a copy on Amazon. It shipped from the UK because it's from a small UK publisher, and I just devoured it. Like, it's about 300 pages. I read it in 2 days. I could have easily read it in one sitting, but I tried to like slow down because I didn't want it to be over. This is a contemporary story about a young man named Mark who gets fired from his job in Dublin and ships across the country to the west coast to a small town near Galway, where he gets a job in a company called Wellcat that makes cat food. And it's kind of like a workplace comedy, I guess, through a lot of it. There are a lot of misunderstandings, and the characters doing all these things that you're like, no, don't do that. That's kind of painful, but it's really funny, and all of those instances like shift the story in really good ways that make you want to keep reading. And it has that great balance for a contemporary story where there's like this intriguing mystery at the center of it. What's going on with the future fish? It's a secret project. What really is it? Some characters think it's like an alien conspiracy. Some think it's demonic as well. Like there are demonic things happening here. So there is like this like vibe of the otherworldly creeping in, but it's very much rooted in reality through and through. Those are just kind of like side events that come up, but the central mystery is really fun, really engaging to see the main character trying to figure out what's going on, and his boss cracking down on him and trying to stop him from that. It really reminded me a lot, especially like the first half, I would say, of Mr. Penumbra's 24-hour bookstore, with this like mysterious new job and strange coworkers, and like trying to like figure out how to toe the line of learning more without getting fired and that kind of thing. And it was just super fun and engaging. It was really fast. It was really funny. And I think just that combination of that narration again, that feels like you're just sitting down with a character telling you their story, just feels really fun and super engaging. And to me, I think this is the most engaging fiction for me, like more so than like even pure genre fiction that's designed just to pull you in. Yeah, it just draws me in so much, these kind of narrators that feel like they're your friend and they're just talking to you. Despite Mark's antics and doing things that I was like, no, don't do that, don't do that, I still wanted to be his friend. And my only con with this novel is that the like final reveal of the mystery was a little, I don't know, like it presented all these crazy ideas for what it could be, and then it was something more mundane. So I don't want to say any more than that, but the big reveal at the end, I was hoping for a little bit more, but I wasn't disappointed at all. It didn't diminish my love for the book at all. It was just like my kind of personal reading proclivities led me to expecting something different. But all in all, I love this book so much, and I didn't really care what really happened, to be honest. I just wanted to follow these characters and spend more time with them. So I really loved it. And it did kind of end on a note. It feels like the kind of book that wouldn't have a sequel, but it did end on a note that would kind of shift it into a sequel of another storyline. So I really hope that does happen. But if not, I just really want to read Connor Sneed's next book, whatever that may be. The next book that I read in April was Dreaming Home by Lucian Childs. This book had an interesting structure in that it was kind of one of those books when it's broken into 5 sections, each one told by a different character or following a different character. And so you start to wonder, is this like a short story collection, linked stories, or a novel and stories, or a novel with different perspectives? And it makes you think about it in a different way, how they all come together, and like kind of this central view that you as a reader create, based on what you hear from different characters, from some talking in first person, some in first person plural, and some in third person. They mostly revolve around a narrative arc of Kevin, who is at the beginning a gay teen who is caught with drawing like naked men, and his sister turns him in to the parents. And this is in the late 70s, and they do not take it well. They ship him off to a conversion therapy kind of church straight camp kind of place. And the rest of the book kind of follows throughout these characters' lives, like Kevin, his sister Rachel, their parents, his partners, the other boys at the conversion therapy church camp. And so we get like all these different views of kind of this character, but also the people around him and his life, how they see him, how they see the family, and all of the kind of interlinkings and the trauma that he's experienced and how it kind of ramifies throughout the family. So it's pretty heavy, but written in a beautiful way, and also in a way that's really easy to read and absorb. I think because you feel so connected to the characters, they feel like real people, and you want to know what's going on with them. You want to know they're okay. I think more than anything is what kept me reading. And so I was like, I just want you to be happy and to be okay. And the last book that I read in April was Just by Looking at Him by Ryan O'Connell. I didn't know about this book until recently, and then I had to read it because it sounded so great. This is, like I said, written by Ryan O'Connell, who is the writer slash producer, writer and or producer of the Netflix series Special. And it's kind of, I think like that show felt like semi-autobiographical, and the book does too. Like it's about a character close to him. Like it's a gay TV writer with cerebral palsy and kind of this intersectional struggles in his life, and like kind of he pokes a lot of fun at himself and the world. It's really funny, I think, is the main thing. Like if you like this series Special, I think you'll really like this. It's a similar tone, but just really funny. Like had me actually laughing out loud, which I almost never do at books. Like I'll chuckle internally, like I get the joke, but like this actually had me laughing. Like it was actually one of the funniest things I've ever read. Like quite funny and fun to read. And the cover of the book, I have to say, really cracked me up. Like I think that's my favorite joke from the book. It looks like one of these like very like high art literary fiction novels about like the gay experience. And I don't know, like it's just going to take itself so seriously and be so weighty and heavy just to be art. But it's really funny, and the cover shows like a nude guy on a beach, and then there's like a little sticker or something over his bum. I'll put the picture here so you can see it. But it just like is already kind of poking fun at itself and at this kind of idea of what a gay novel should be, I guess. And I just found that really funny. But yeah, the novel follows this character through kind of his relationship, through dealing with his own disability and his own queerness and his own struggles, and also through his career as a writer for a TV series, and then like his family relationships and that kind of thing, as he's kind of like rediscovering himself. It reminded me a bit of First Time for Everything in a way, because it's kind of about coming out in a way, like learning that like the things you thought you had dealt with, you have not dealt with, and there's still more work to do on yourself and to learn about the world. And so he kind of has like this rebirth and rediscovery throughout the novel, he's in a dark place a lot of it, but still really funny. And then like towards the end, you see like some strong character growth. Like he's turning a new leaf and like becoming a totally different person. It was a really good, really enjoyable read. Read it really fast, and it was just a fun experience overall, with some like weighty meat to it as well towards the end. So that's what I read in April. I'd love to hear what you've been reading, or if you have any thoughts on any of these books, let me know in the comments below. And with that, I'll let you get back to your reading. See you next time.